Hello everyone, the Tax Terminator is back, and today we have a clash of titans. Panama versus Uruguay, everything you need to know in this video. Hello everyone, Tax Terminator here, and I'm in Bogota, Colombia, and I've just met with some of our clients here in Colombia. They got their digital nomad visa, they were super happy. And we were discussing lifestyle versus taxes, and they say, well, Javier, we loved your Panama series. We've been checking out Panama, super interesting. But you also talk a lot about Uruguay, and you mentioned how Uruguay is also a great place to get tax residents in Latin America. These are Canadian clients who are really focusing on developing their business in and around Latin America, and they really want to focus on this region. And definitely Uruguay and Panama for me are the top choices when it comes to tax residents in the region. So they asked me point blank, Javier, what are the major differences? How would you compare Panama to Uruguay in terms of tax residents and global business? So I thought I could make this video so I can share with everyone exactly what I told these gentlemen and help you and guide you to make the ideal decision of whether Uruguay or Panama is the ideal choice for you. So let's get started. Number one, I would say that I need to get one thing clear and address this elephant in the room, which is that the reputation of Uruguay and Panama is different. While I am a huge fan of Panama, I have to acknowledge that in certain, especially European jurisdictions, the stigma of the Panama Papers still lingers like a kind of old perfume. So I do think Panama has done a lot to improve its reputation. Panama has updated its laws. It has really become more competitive and cooperative in the good sense. So it is a respected member of the international community. But I would be lying to you if I told you that you don't run into certain issues here and there when it comes to saying that your tax residence is in Panama, or that you're sending funds to and from Panama, or that you're operating through a Panamanian entity. Again, if you're doing business in the Latin American region, or if you're doing business with North America, then this issue is very much minimized. But if you're doing business, especially with the European Union, then that may come up. However, in particular, I would add that Switzerland has no issue in working with Panamanian institutions or Panamanian tax residents. So that's that on the Panamanian side. However, on the Uruguayan side, I will say that Uruguay enjoys a very whitelisted status. So if that is important to you and you really want the best pure cut, best image possible, then I do think Uruguay has a slight advantage here. Secondly, one of the gentlemen with whom I spoke earlier today is very much interested in exploring the world. He wants a friendly tax residence in the region, but ultimately he wants to travel around and explore. So I will say that here, Uruguay also has a slight advantage because in order to obtain tax residence in Panama, you're essentially required to spend 183 days a year. Now, once you get it, you can make an argument that you could maintain it in later years by not triggering tax residence anywhere else, provided that all of your links remain closer to Panama. You could keep that status there. But let's say the core of the law is 183 days. Whereas in Uruguay, you do have a 60-day physical presence tax residence option. It does involve buying a property. You do have to invest around $500,000 in purchasing a property in Uruguay. Now, the amount is in Uruguayan peso, so the dollar amount may vary, but at the moment of making this video, it's around $500,000 US. And you have a right to claim Uruguayan tax residence by simply spending 60 days in Uruguay. So slight advantage if you want to be a digital nomad. Now, when it comes to the hardcore taxation elements, here is where I think you start to see Panama come back and have a little bit more of advantage over Uruguay. Why? Panama is really a pure territorial tax system, meaning that your foreign source income is not taxed in Panama, and Panama is very black and white. So in most cases, you will have income that is clearly defined as local and therefore taxable, or foreign income, therefore not taxable. So in Panama, it is very difficult to run into like a gray area type situation. Whereas in Uruguay, it is a bit more nuanced. In Uruguay, there's a little bit more debate on what is considered foreign, what is considered locally sourced income. And on top of that, the other situation that you have to take into consideration is that Uruguay at heart is a semi-territorial system, meaning that certain foreign income is taxed while certain other foreign income is not taxed. So in Uruguay, if you're a regular tax resident, you will run into a situation where some financial foreign income might be taxed, especially dividends, capital gains, things of that nature. However, in all fairness, Uruguay does come back and does offer an 11-year tax holiday that you can take advantage of as a new tax resident of Uruguay. And essentially, it turns Uruguay for that period, 11 years, into a pure territorial system like Panama. When it comes to running an active business from the country, again, I think both Panama and Uruguay offer great advantages. But here, I would say Panama is, again, slightly more flexible. Panama's tax rules, Panama's default tax rules, do not tax companies that are essentially trading companies. So if you're in Panama and you are buying goods in country A, selling them in country B, and those goods essentially never enter Panama, then that operation, that business operation is tax-free. In addition to that, under Panamanian tax law, if you, from an office located in Panama, manage, control, and direct the sale of services that are consumed and taken advantage of abroad, then that is also considered an activity that generates foreign source income, therefore not taxable in Panama. So you can very easily set up shop in Panama. You don't have to necessarily hire locals, and you can run your business within the normal tax system and still have a very advantageous tax situation. Whereas in Uruguay, to achieve this, you have to go for one of the special business tax regimes they have. Now, that being said, the special tax regimes in Uruguay are great. So number one, you have the trading company regime. So essentially, if you're doing what I described before, you're buying goods in country A, selling them in country B, and the goods never enter Uruguay, the Uruguayan tax authorities can grant you a special status whereby only 3% of your overall profits will be considered taxable income. They will apply the corporate income tax rate to that. And when you do all the numbers and you run the calculations, your effective corporate income tax ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.75%. So Panama is 0, Uruguay is 0.75. Pretty close. Now, in addition to that, if you want to run your company from Uruguay and you want to export services from Uruguay, similar to what I was describing in the case of Panama, you have your clients overseas and you want to export services that are consumed and taken advantage of outside of Uruguay, you can also operate in a zero tax manner, but you have to qualify for the free zone regime. So it is not as easy as just setting up shop. You have to present your business plan to the Uruguayan tax authorities. You have to get approval. And once you have all of that, then you can essentially operate tax-free within Uruguay. Now, the other catch is that unlike in the case of Panama, you do have to hire some locals, and you do have to make sure that the locals are at least 75% of your workforce. If your project is large enough and you're going to hire substantial staff, you can get a special exemption to drop that down to 50%. So ultimately, you do get to the same result, but just Panama is a bit less burdensome, a bit more flexible, and there are, I guess, fewer administrative procedures to go through in order to get that, let's say, tax-free status, right? I would also say that from a travel hub perspective, Panama does have an advantage, just because Panama is obviously in Central America, Uruguay is in South America. So if you have to constantly fly back to the US or Canada, then definitely it's easier to do that from Panama than it would be from Uruguay. I would also note that from a banking perspective, both jurisdictions are really solid, they're really strong, but I would say that Panamanian banks are maybe a bit more flexible in terms of how they work with you as a client. We've seen Uruguayan banks be a bit more conservative, especially when it comes to things like lending and credit cards. I think that the fact that Panama has a lot of that American financial business culture really makes the difference. And you can find a lot of that US Miami banking culture in Panama. So if you're really looking for loans and financing and sophisticated financial products, I think Panama might be slightly more flexible, whereas Uruguay is more conservative, but still a great place to park money and to bank. When it comes to dividends from your companies, both jurisdictions offer some interesting options. So in the case of Uruguay, the free zone company regime allows you to take out dividends essentially tax-free from your Uruguayan free zone company. If you're using the trading company regime, only that 3% I mentioned earlier, that portion of your business profit will be subject to corporate income tax, and then that same corporate income tax portion will be taxed at the dividend level when you take it out. So ultimately, only a very, very small percentage of your profits will then be double taxed at the dividend level. So you're achieving an overall taxation of a bit under 1%, which is still very attractive. In the case of Panama, if you are running a business operation from Panama that essentially generates tax-free income because it generates foreign source income under Panamanian tax rules, you can, in many cases, take those dividends out tax-free. Now, in Panama, what will be crucial for you to understand is that whether or not your business has a notice of operations, un aviso de operaciones, will be crucial in determining the dividend tax. So if you are running certain operations that require a notice of operations in Panama and you only have foreign source income, you may be subject to a very small withholding tax of 5% on dividends. But if you don't require a notice of operations, which many of our clients don't, then the dividends are taxed at 0%. So it is, again, a very, very attractive regime. Now, I would end by saying that the jurisdiction that is right for you depends on your individual circumstances, and is definitely something that is worth analyzing. And in many cases, you could even combine two jurisdictions to make the perfect, let's say, little smoothie for your own tax situation. So if you want to learn more and you want to dive deeper into the Panamanian and the Uruguayan tax systems, be sure to go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We'd be happy to help you. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, and I'll see you in the next video.